7. Sabotage. I heard Neil and froze beside the bike. When Spo looked up, "Hey, Lunch! What are you doing to my bike?" Spo suddenly screamed. "Nothing. I was just admiring your cool stickers," I stammered. "Dad! Bill Lynch is sabotaging Spo's bike," Neil yelled. Mr. Sutter looked up from the hood of the Sutters' Renault car. He walked slowly across the yard, wiping his hands on a shop towel. He looked at the bike. "Is this Spo's bike? I thought Hershey's was the yellow one." Spo laughed. "It was Hershey's till he lost it to me in a bet." Hershey smiled and chuckled. I knew Hershey had lost the bet on purpose. Hershey had wanted a brand new bike, and figured if he lost a bet to Spo with his old bike, his mom and dad would buy him a new one. I didn't think it would work, but it did. Mr. Sutter knelt down beside Spo's bike to examine it. "Bill, the front brakes are unhooked. That could be extremely dangerous. Did you unhook the brakes, Bill?" he questioned. I was flustered. I tried to think of some explanation. "No, well, yes, but I was just trying to reconnect them when Spo came out." Hershey interrupted my babbling. "Mr. Sutter, let me explain. You see, it's like this. Bill was—" Mr. Sutter held up his hand, and Hershey stopped. "Hershey, I want Bill to explain this. Every time you explain something, it's always almost reasonable, and I do not wish to question my gullibility. Now, Bill, why were you tinkering with Spo's bike?" I wasn't tinkering, I whined. Why then were you doing whatever you were doing?" I was just putting the tire back on," I said. Mr. Sutter raised an eyebrow. "Who took the tire off?" Well, I did," I sighed. "Why?" Mr. Sutter continued his questions. I looked over at Hershey, who was zipping his lips. I couldn't think what he meant. I didn't want to tell, but there was too much pressure. Mr. Sutter's general grilling had broken me. Mr. Sutter stepped between me and Hershey. "Bill, I asked you, not Hershey. Why did you remove Spo's tire?" I was quiet for a minute, trying desperately to figure out some excuse. Finally, after the silence and the staring, it all became unbearable. "It was just an innocent prank." "What was the prank?" Mr. Sutter asked. Hershey slapped his forehead and shook his head as I related the prank. We put some red stuff in his tire, and the next time he pumps up his tire, it'll spray red dye on him." Steve interrupted. "Actually, it's washable red dye." Yeah, washable. It was just washable red dye, and it'll spray on his hands. It's barely a prank," I finished. "I see. And I assume, like always, you're going to swear you were the lone prankster?" Mr. Sutter asked. Chapter 8. Front and Back. I nodded. "I acted alone." "So how about a natural consequence?" Mr. Sutter suggested. "Bill, let the air out of Spo's tire, and then you should repump it." But then I'll get all sprayed," I said anxiously. Mr. Sutter shook his head. "Don't play with the Bunsen burner if you don't want to get burned, Bill." I huffed and started to lean down. Suddenly Hershey yelled, Wait, it was my idea. I just got Bill to help me get the tire off." Obviously, I didn't think Bill could have done it on his own. "Thank you for fessing up, Hershey," Mr. Sutter said. Hershey stood solemnly. "I'll release the booby trap, as it was my idea." With that, Hershey walked slowly over to the back tire and pushed the valve stem to release the air. Spo was visibly giddy to watch Hershey get his comeuppance. Hershey pressed the valve, and a hiss, but no spray came out. Hershey finished letting the air out of the tire, then started pumping the tire up again. "I guess the booby trap was a dud," said Hershey, shrugging. Mr. Sutter said, "Well, I guess no harm, no foul. Cool it with the pranks, boys." Mr. Sutter turned and headed back to fixing his misfiring Renault engine. I heaved a heavy sigh of relief. I'll rehook up Spo's brakes," and I leaned down and hooked up the front wheel brake caliper. "You're lucky, Lunch," Spo growled. "Oh, pipe down, Spo. Even if the booby trap had worked, it was only a little spray. Probably wouldn't even turn your pinky red," Hershey said calmly. Meanwhile, Neil was scratching his head, obviously in deep thought. Suddenly, he looked up, and Neil asked, "Did Bill just reattach the front brake? I recall Hershey deflated the back tire." Spo screamed, "Hershey tried to double fool us!" Mr. Sutter looked up from the Renault engine. He sighed, and he walked back over to us. "It looks as though our problems are not yet resolved," Neil growled. "Dad! Hershey let the air out of my non-booby-trap tire! They booby-trapped the front tire!" Mr. Sutter was quiet for a moment, probably reconstructing the events of these tiny people. After what seemed like forever, "Okay, Bill, it's your turn to deflate the front tire." I huffed and leaned down again. "Wait," said Neil. "Let me get the camera!" "No way, Neil," I yelled. "You don't have to wait for Neil. Just get the consequence done, Bill," Mr. Sutter said. Neil ran into the house anyway to get his camera. I raced into the garage and found a little screwdriver to deflate the tire. I leaned down nervously and pressed the valve. while leaning my face and body as far as I possibly could away from the booby-trapped valve stem. Nothing happened. Just a little shh. Relieved, I relaxed and faced forward a little bit. Suddenly, switch! My hand, arm, face were suddenly drenched in red ink mist. Ah! I screamed, "It burns! It burns!" Spo began roaring with laughter uncontrollably. He began rolling on the ground. I too dropped to the ground, trying to roll my face into the cool grass to ease my pain. Hershey bent down a little bit and tried to console me. "Bill, it can't be too bad. If you overact, Mr. Sutter might think we've really tried to harm Spo." I rubbed my burning face, smearing the ink all over. "Say cheese, Bill," said Neil, and he clicked his Polaroid instant camera. I ran inside, past Hershey, past Steve, past the two little runts, both who were breaking out and laughing. I ran through the kitchen, into the Sutter's small hallway bathroom. As I ran by Mrs. Sutter, she gasped. She anxiously knocked on the door. "Are you bleeding, Billy?" "No!" I turned and looked at my face in the mirror. I looked like a mutant Sith warrior. I turned on the water and scrubbed my face. It took 5 minutes to get most of the ink off my hands and face. I looked into the mirror again. My face was all red and chafed from all the scrubbing. I helped and opened the bathroom door. Steve and Hershey were waiting for me in the hall. "My dad wants to talk to us," Steve said. We marched outside and over to the Renault. Mr. Sutter looked up. "Bill, that was a natural consequence. My favorite kind of parenting. You three are on probation for the next month. Do not bother Spo again."